Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in to my second video on IRR. So today we're going to talk about IRR, what IRR is, and basically go through an example to make sense out of what it means, what it's used for, and then at the end of this presentation we're going to talk about, MPV versus IRR and which one to choose. So if you haven't seen my first video on MPV, please go back and see that video, and then you'll be good to go to watch this video. So IRR is essentially a discount rate where NPV of particular cash flows is zero. So the higher the IRR, the more growth potential a project has. And IRR is used for project evaluation and profitability of a project. The formula for IRR is essentially the same as NPV, except that you replace NPV with zero because you are calculating the discount rate where NPV of particular cash flows is zero. Now, from a practical sense, IRR is used heavily along with NPV for project evaluation. It's like some companies like to use NPV, some companies like to use IRR. And some companies like to use both. If you are a company with a long history and you are looking to create a long-term shareholder value, you are probably leaning more toward NPV, right? But if you are a smaller company, private company, you are in the business to prove something and then flip it and get out of it, you are looking more for an IRR. And it just depends. And some companies, and also it is a function of timing, if your balance sheet is not doing good, if financially the company is not stable and you want to bring your stock price up, you can focus more on IRR than NPV. So if you have if you have capital constraint and if you have a hard time getting the money, then you can focus more on IRR than NPV. But NPV is essentially widely used. It is the recommended parameter to be used for project evaluation and making important capital budgeting decisions. We go to the next slide. So, as I said, the formula for IRR is the same as NPV, except that instead of NPV, we're going to put zero here now. And instead of the discount rate that I had before, I'm going to put IRR. So it's a summation of cash flow divided by 1 plus IRR to power of t or n. One assumption that IRR makes that is not a good assumption is that all of the positive cash flows of a project are reinvested back at IRR instead of cost of capital. So, which is not a good assumption, right? So NPV assumes that all of the positive future cash flows are reinvested back at discount rate, but IRR assumes that all of the positive cash flows of a project are reinvested back at the IRR instead of cost of capital. So that's a flaw kind of with the IRR methodology, and that's why modified IRR was developed, and we're going to talk about that in a different video. But just for now, just know that to get the IRR of a project, you would have to essentially find the IRR which yields or find a discount rate that would yield an NPV of zero. So I think this concept would get clarified with an example. So let's do an example. So I have time in year 0. I have my investment date. I'm investing $520 million into this project. A year 1, I'm getting back 90. A year 2, I'm getting back $25 million. A year 3, 278. Year 4, 420, and year 5, 500. So if I say 0 is equal to the summation of my cash flows divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of t, that means 0 is equal to negative 520 at year 0, because negative 520 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 0 is going to be 1, so you're left with negative 520. At year 1, you're going to have 90 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 1. At year 2, you're going to have 25 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 2. At year 3, you're going to have 278 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 3. At year 4, you have 420 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 4. And at year 5, you have 500 divided by 1 plus IRR to the power of 5. Now, we have to put an IRR in all these terms here in the denominator to yield an NPV of 0. So if you try this, if you put 28.01%, you should get an NPV of 0. So my IRR for this project is 28.010%. Now, you don't have to do this manually. You can use the Excel function, IRR function in Excel, to calculate the IRR very quickly for 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, 100 years, whatever you want to do, right? So this is just an example how the calculation behind the scene works. So essentially, you'd have to put a number here in the denominator of these terms to get an NPV of the whole thing of 0, and that is essentially how you calculate your IRR. As I said, the most convenient way to do that is to go to Excel and just say equal IRR all of these cash flows, and it would spit out your 28.01% IRR for the project. So if I go to the next slide, so the rule of thumb for IRR must be, if IRR is greater than weighted average cost of capital or my discount rate, the project's rate of return will exceed its cost, and as a result, the project should be accepted. So if my cost of capital is 10% and my IRR is, let's say, 15%, and I'm creating about 5%, like the difference between my IRR and my cost of capital is going to be 5%. I'm creating 5% of value for my shareholders. If my cost of capital is 10% and my IRR is also 10%, which means my NPV is 0, I'm not creating any value, right? Because I'm just creating enough value, or I'm just creating enough to pay back my cost of capital, which is cost of doing business, right? So IRR has to be greater than weighted average cost of capital or discount rate in order to accept the project. If it's less, don't accept it. If your IRR is, let's say, is 11% and your cost of capital is 10%, that's a risky project. You're probably creating, 1% value for the shareholders. I feel more comfortable with at least 15-20% IRR projects instead of focusing on low return projects. Unless the timing is really bad, unless the economy is in a really bad shape, or the market of that industry is in a really bad shape, then you might be satisfied with even a 12 or 13% IRR project. Other than that, I like to see 20% IRR or at least 15% IRR, and that's just my preference, right? Every company, every financial institution is going to have a different way of evaluating this, and different number in mind that would make sense to them based on their income statement, their balance sheet, the financial stability of the company. All right. If IRR is less than weighted average cost of capital, then don't accept the project. Then you're not making money. If your IRR turns out to be 8% and your weighted average cost of capital is 10%, then you're not creating any. You're losing money. You have negative NPV now. So always remember that your IRR should exceed your weighted average cost of capital to invest in that particular project. If you don't get that, don't even think about investing in that project, because you're going to lose money for the company, and as a result, you're going to lose money for the shareholders. Now, which method is better? As I said, there's not a good or bad method, but MPV assumes that positive cash flows are reinvested at the cost of capital. But IRR assumes, unrealistically assumes, that positive cash flows are reinvested back at IRR. So that's one reason why I like MPV more than IRR. Sometimes IRR can have more than one solution. If cash flows experience a sign change by being positive in 1 year and changing to negative in the next year, the IRR method will have more than one solution. If this occurs, IRR method must not be used for project evaluation. I think the most important thing here is what is the company's strategy? What is the company's philosophy? Are we cash constrained? Do we have issues? Are we in the business to prove the business or prove an acreage and then get out of it? Are we in the business to stay in it for a long time? I think based on that, you can decide whether you want to go with MPV or IRR. But MPV, if you talk to any financial professors, it's long-term value. That's what creates value for the shareholders, and that is the recommended metric. That is a recommended capital budgeting metric to use when making decisions for a company. I hope this video was helpful. Tune in to my next videos. I'll talk about weighted average cost of capital, modified IRR, as well as other capital budgeting parameters. Thank you very much for listening, and see you soon.